Oh man, it's been a morning. Good morning. Sorry if you've missed the I didn't post to let people know I was going live. It's just been a chaotic morning. Let me make sure we're working. Perfect. Everything seems to be working. Maybe we're gonna find out. I've been learning a lot about streaming and stuff. Test. So that shows up there, but it doesn't show up on YouTube. Why doesn't it show up on YouTube? Couldn't say. And it's not showing up on my overlay. Like I said, it's been, whoo, buddy, it has been an adventure today. We're gonna kind of jam right through with everything being a little busted, and I apologize for that. I will spend some time this weekend on trying to figure out how to get it to work. I was going to add a chat overlay, and when I added the chat overlay, it kicked off the YouTube connection. So I think what happened is when I re-added YouTube, it just kicked off the chat overlay connection. Sorry, and I think I know how to fix it, but I'm just not ready to take the time to do it right now. That being said, I think I can get rid of my Twitch chat box on here. If you're on Twitch and you're watching, awesome. Just throw something in the chat box for me just to let me know that you see it if it's working. If not, that's cool too. But anyway, today, sorry for the long intro. Like I said, it's just been chaos, all chaos. We're going to go over Warhammer, the old world. We're going to talk about the morale rules that they have previewed. We're going to read through them like we do historically. And then if we have time, there's a couple things I want to walk through. I want to walk through a little bit of the game that I've been working on, Battle for Greyloch. It's our fantasy game. There's a small group of us kind of putting that together. And then I also, if we have time, want to touch on some of the things that I think are the real inherent issues with 10th edition 40K, but that may just be its own separate stream. We may do that another time. So we'll see. But let's dig in to the old world. Okay. Sorry. The Amazon Alexa that my wife owns is talking to me. I hate them. I think they are Skynet incarnate. So, and she's still chatting away over there. I don't know what I said, but hold on one second. Alexa, stop. Yeah, just going ham over there, talking about Motorola's. I don't know. Hate those things. Old World Almanac, get in the right headspace for morale and psychology. So this is going to be very interesting because morale and psychology were they were one of the sticking points in fantasy, right? They were one of the issues that I don't want to say killed the game because that's not what killed the game. You know, we all know that. We all know that fantasy died for a lot of reasons. It died because it had a very high cost of entry. It died because 40K was getting a lot more popular. And it died because, generally speaking, I think GW wasn't putting effort into it, if that makes sense. And this is a personal opinion. This isn't anything I know firsthand. Um, but from what I see, it looks like as 40K got more and more popular, the rules team just kind of half-assed their way through a lot of the fantasy releases. You know, you have, and I know this happened in 40K multiple times, but you had armies that didn't get books for two straight editions in fantasy. You know, so it's one of those where you just have these different interactions that I think all contributed to it dying. But I know morale was one of the things that people just did not enjoy with fantasy compared to some of the other games. And I know a lot of a lot of the younger players, right? Not that I'm old, and if you're on Twitch, you're about to get hit with an ad. Sorry for you. Not that I'm old, but the guys that are like 20 to 30, that they're playing these games that have played a lot more of the more modern games. They don't like a lot of them, or they don't seem to like that style of morale. Where you're literally running. And I've even heard people say, you could just take it out of the game. It doesn't add anything to it. And for some games, that's probably true. And I don't mean to keep coughing. My kid had a cold last week, and I never got really sick. But man, I'll be damned if I just haven't been like this right here for about a week straight. Dirty little germ goblins. A battlefield, no matter what the average Bestigor might claim, is not a happy place to be in the old world, with marauding bands of bickering orcs, frenzied chaos warriors, bearing the gifts of the gods, and terrifying dragons, both living and dead, all rampaging around the domains of man. This is not a good place to be a lowly imperial trooper waggling a halberd. And one of the cool things about this, and this is one of the things I always appreciated about fantasy much more than 40K, is that humanity, while yes, you had the Imperial Guard in fantasy or in 40K, but humanity in fantasy were perpetual underdogs in most fights, right? Most of the time, humanity was perpetual underdogs. We didn't have, like in fantasy, they didn't have space marines who were superheroes and all these other things. Not that they're heroic, but you get the point. You know, it was very much a struggle to survive in a lot of situations, and they didn't have that kind of superhero, like the Sigmarines that you have in Sigmar and stuff. Which I mean, that's what they are to me, is just space marines in fantasy. So today we're going to buckle up our most ergonomic sabatons and take a break for freedom on our way to discuss how morale and psychology work in Warhammer the Old World. Morale. Last week we discussed the nitty-gritty of combat, seeing what happens once that spittle-flecked Chaos Warrior crashes into that ever so slightly quivering spear you're holding. As we saw, it's quite rare for a round of melee to end in a draw, and where there's a loser, there are consequences. The first of these is the break test, a leadership role modified by how badly you lost the combat, with three outcomes: break, flee, fall back in good order, or break and flee, fall back in good order, and give ground. And we talked about this and how I think this is a very good change, right? This is a positive change because losing the combat doesn't basically mean you lose your whole unit right away. If you Did we talk about this already? Is this whoa, you guys don't want that. Is this last week's article? Nope. All right. They literally just copy pasted some of this. Gotcha. Okay, so if the modified roll is equal or lower than leadership, you give ground. If its modified roll is higher than leadership, you fall back in good order. And if the natural roll is higher than leadership, you break and flee. Which we discussed this, like I said, last week. So it's one of those where I don't know that we necessarily need to dig through this again unless they break down what everything is. And it doesn't look like there is. In the first case, the losing unit turns and runs in the opposite direction from whatever. What the? Oh, and break and flee. Okay. I see. When they said the first case, my brain was thinking about the picture, not about this sentence. So I was like, give ground is the first case. You run 2d6, pivoting only to avoid impassable terrain, and if any part of the fleeing unit crosses a battlefield edge, it is destroyed, which is pretty standard. If you run off the table, you run away, you count as being destroyed. If the enemy gives chase and rolls high enough on 2d6 to make contact, the fleeing unit is destroyed. If they run through another enemy unit, they take additional wounds as they go. If they run through a friendly unit, however, they're safe, but they may now bear the brunt of the pursuer's charge. In short, they may not. However, they're safe, but that unit may now bear the brunt of the pursuer's charge. In short, try not to break and flee. Okay, so the way I'm understanding this is if you break and flee, you run 2d 6 inches, which again is pretty standard. However, I believe in 8th edition, and I could be wrong because, like I said, 8th edition was the edition I didn't really play. But I believe in 8th edition, you don't even move your models, you just roll. And then if your opponent rolls higher than you, you just die without moving. But if he doesn't, then you roll and you move, and then your opponent has to stay there. I could be wrong on that, but that is kind of in my head how that works. If I remember correctly, is you don't actually move until you find out whether or not your unit dies. But it looks like both units are moving in this situation. Regardless of what 8th Ed rules are, it looks like both units are moving in this situation. They run 2d 6 inches, pivoting only to avoid impassable terrain. Okay. And then, if you hit the battlefield edge, you're dead. Your opponent will have the option to chase you or to stay put. If this interacts like it did in older versions of the game, you'll have to make a leadership check to stay put. But regardless, if you chase, then you'll roll 2d6 also, and if your roll allows you to make contact, then the fleeing unit is destroyed. And again, that's pretty standard fare, and I think I just repeated myself quite a bit. If you run through another enemy unit, you'll take additional wounds as you go. What I'm guessing that is you'll roll a die for each model in your unit, and then on like a 1, you'll just take like a mortal wound or something, which again, I'm not a fan of. I hate mortal wounds as a mechanic. I do understand that they probably need to exist in minor amounts. This is one of those times where I don't mind it being the mechanic that gets used. Rather than resolving hits, resolving wounds, resolving saves, it does kind of speed things up if that's how it works. I'm just guessing. But that would make sense, is if you run through an enemy unit, like you get to, it's like a die roll to see if you take a mortal wound. It may just be you're destroyed. It might not even be a mortal wound. So like ward saves would not allow you to save from them. If you run through another enemy, blah, blah, blah. If you run through a friendly unit, however, they are safe. So what that tells me right here is if you flee, you can flee through your own units. But if you do, then the pursuer can then charge into the new unit. And if I remember right, we'd have to go back to last week's video, but if I remember right, when you pursue, you count as having charged if this happens. I could be wrong. Again, it's one of those where it makes sense, and I think it initiates a whole new combat. It sounds like there's going to be a lot of like potential for multiple combats and multiple interactions in the fight phase. If you fall back in good order, still be, but they're not. They discard the lower of the 2 dice when they flee, and they automatically rally and reform at the end, ready to receive the charge of their pursuer or to hit back next turn. Okay, so this makes sense. If you roll a modified roll that's higher than your leadership, but your natural roll is not, and you fall back in good order, you'll still roll both dice. And this isn't necessarily exactly what I expected, but it's similar. I figured it'd be a flat like 3 or 6 inch movement, but a 2d6 dropping the lowest also makes sense. And you'll get a automatic rally and an automatic reform at the end of your movement. So what that means is you can run away and then just immediately turn around to face your opponent, and then they if they pursue, you don't die, but they do count as having charged you, right? And then if they don't pursue, or if they fail their pursuit check, like if they roll snake eyes and you roll a 6 and a 1, you move 6 inches, their snake eyes doesn't get them where they need to be. Giving ground is the best result when losing combat. The loser simply steps. Giving ground is when you make the leadership check. Okay. Giving ground is the best result. You simply step back 2 inches, terrain permitting, attempting to put some space between you. Uh, the winner chooses to follow up and press their advantage, in which case. And this is basically just like a piling consolidation kind of interaction. And really this interaction kind of makes me think of Lord of the Rings. Like they have a lot of unit pushing in that game. It's really a neat concept. I haven't gotten to play a ton of it, but there is a lot of like you're not necessarily fighting to kill things. You're fighting to kind of push them around and bully them a little bit and kind of control the table. And that's where this kind of makes me think is this is kind of inspired by that. Running is the only thing. Psychology. Okay, so fear, terror, stupidity, animosity, frenzy, unbreakable, stubborn, and hatred. Psychology was separate from the rest of the USRs. It's all now found in one place, the core rulebook, which makes sense because all of these were effectively core rules. There's no reason for them not to be in the core rulebook. And I think they were. They just weren't necessarily USRs. Units causing fear, for instance, will have enemies quaking in their boots. If an enemy with lower unit strength wishes to charge a fear causing unit, it must take a leadership test or its charge will fail. Already in combat with a scary regiment of skeleton warriors, you take a -1 to hit. Okay, so that's interesting. So fear has changed a little bit back to what it used to be. It used to be you had to make these leadership checks. And if I remember right in 8th Ed, it was just like once you were already there, you would reduce your weapon skill. I could be wrong. Again, uh, I know 7th and I know 6th. 8th, not super familiar with. I have played a few games. I am like learning it. Terror is even worse. If you're charged by a beast with this effect, you have to take a leadership test to be able to declare a charge reaction. If you fail, you must flee, and that's before any dice are rolled to see if the charge succeeds. And there's an additional -1 penalty to opposing units' leadership characteristic when making break tests. So terror units, and again, here's these fear and terror mechanics were really rough at times, because of certain armies that could just army-wide cause fear or terror. It really could make it very difficult to interact against them. So I don't think these are bad interactions. And that's blah, 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 blah. And I assume this is just going to be an aura, like a 6 or a 12-inch aura from the unit. So we have Dragon Ogre Shaggoth. Armor Bane 2. I'm curious did we see what Armor Bane is? I don't remember. It's interesting. Close order, ensorcelled weapons. Immune to psychology, large target, stomp attacks, storm call terror, the quickening storm. Okay. So immune to psychology would mean he wouldn't have to interact with those fear or terror checks, if I remember right. I'm curious to see what Armor Bane does. I can't remember if we've seen that already. I know we've seen it, but I don't know if GW has released what it actually does. It's one of those where it seems weird because if I remember right, the attacks all have an AP stat, so having Armor Bane, unless it's like a wound roll of 6 or a hit roll of 6, makes it happen, seems like a weird interaction when we have these armor penetration stats. But if you're watching this, let me know in the chat or the comments. I can't remember, and I'm not going to be looking it up right now. Frenzy was hilarious, and Frenzy is a blast in Blood Bowl. Like Blood Bowl Frenzy is so fun. It gives models in the unit an extra attack, and it's immune from fear and terror. And you must always charge if able to, and can never choose to flee from a charge. So it's not super different. Let's see. And hatred, which I think hatred is just rerolls. Yes, this is what I want. I want the magic article, right? That's really what we need because the magic was the other portion of this. So I think overall the leadership doesn't look like it's changed a ton. It does look like it's been toned down a little bit. I'll be curious to see what the average unit leaderships are in the game, just because if everything's got really shitty leadership, we're not really fixing what was largely considered an issue with the game. I think the close combat leadership rules are phenomenal. I think they look like they are a much better interaction than they used to be. Obviously, I won't know until I play the game, but even just having the potential to uh even just having the potential to not die added to it, right? You either make it or you die becomes like here's a few different options. It just makes more sense to me to do it that way. Like it's a very good interaction. I like the old leadership mechanics where you physically have to run away. I think it's a very cool interaction that adds a lot of depth to a game, although I understand why more modern games have gotten away from it. Um, but overall, I think it's a good interaction. I like it. I'll be curious to see Magic and how that interacts. Do we have anything else in the community we want to dig into before we look at anything else? We talked about the combat phase. Da, 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 da. Are there any? I don't think they've done any model reveals outside of the Bone Dragon, right? Crazy. Articles. Let's just go to all news and features, see if there's anything. The Meta Watch for Sigmar. Uh, I don't know enough about Sigmar. I have gone to a couple tournaments, and it's a fun game. It's a lot better than it was, for sure. Let's see. I don't care about your. No, that's not even a Meta Watch. I don't want to watch the video, right? I just don't. World Championships of Warhammer. First place was Lumineth Realm Lords. All my buddies hate elves. Not all of them, a couple of them. Let's see. Heresy. That's a cool model, by the way. I don't think there's anything we really needed to look at here then. So before I jump off here, right? I said there's a couple things I want to talk about. We'll talk about the 40K stuff first, mostly because I can do a standalone video for the Greyloch. Uh, no, let's flip that. Right. Nah. So 40K. Let's do it. And I'm not doing this to poo-poo 40K. I still play it. I still have fun. Right. Boop, 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 boop. Let's see. Is there anything in 40K? Okay, I don't know what this is, but I want to know what this is. That's Sigmar. Those are cool. Okay. So that being said, I've talked a lot about it. I have my own inherent issues with 40K 10th edition, right? I still play it. I still have fun. I just don't do as many tournaments because from a competitive aspect, I just feel like it's not it's not as good as it could be. And I don't mean that. I'm trying to think of the right way to say it. From a competitive standpoint, I just feel like the game is missing something for me, right? The randomized objectives are fine. I enjoy tactical. It is a very fun way to play. But what I will say is the fact that fixed from a competitive standpoint isn't really a viable option does feel kind of poopy. And what I mean by that is with fixed objectives, you have a bucket of points, right? And that's it. You just have that many points. You've got two secondaries. You can score 20 points each on each secondary theoretically. But if you miss a turn, you miss it. Like that's it. It's you get it or you don't. Whereas with tactical, there's a lot of tiered secondaries that allow for you to make up those points lost, right? If you look at investigate signals, if you do 1 quarter, it's 2 points. 2 quarters is 4 points, and then I believe it's like 6 and 8. I could be wrong on that, but the point is that you could. I know it's more than five, right? So if you miss a turn and then you get investigate signals, you could potentially make up that turn of missed points. And then what's the other? There's a few of them like that. Um like bring it down. You can score as many as you can score when you do tactical, and you get an extra point for doing it when you do tactical. So it's one of those like, yes, if you take bring it down as a fixed secondary, you can cap it, but your cap, if I remember right, is just 20, right? I'm going to look that up. Holy cow, I'm sorry I picked this up. Because I don't want to say something and then have it just be patently false, right? So let's go to games. Let's pull up something where I've played some fixed objectives. Did Zach play fixed? No. Did John play fixed that game? Nope. Bo play fixed this game. All right, cool, cool, cool. Okay, yeah, you just have access to 20 points. Whereas with the tacticals, like there's no cap, right? You can score as many as you can score. And so to me, I just feel like what we need to do as a community or as a there just needs to be a way to make tactical scoring more viable, because that will help some of these armies that are struggling. Because some of the armies that are struggling aren't struggling because they can't play the game, right? Um, and actually, let's pull this up and see what everybody's win rates are. Nope, that's not what I want. There we go. All right, so can we zoom you out so I can see it? All right. So like Custodes, right? It's not that they can't play the game. It's that they don't play the tactical game super well. They don't have as much mobility as a lot of the like higher tiered armies do. And that's where the tactical really, if you play a mobile army, you're going to perform much better at tactical than armies that do not. And let's look at this, right? Space Marines historically not a very mobile army. That doesn't mean you can't make mobile builds with them, but they are just not a super mobile army. Guard, again, same thing, not super mobile. Uh, can make some relatively mobile builds with them, but where guard suffers, they don't really have much staying power if you make them mobile. So they run into the same issues that like Drukhari or some of these other armies have, where I can get to an objective, but I can't stay on it, right? Imperial Knights, I don't have any clue. I don't get to play against them often. It's not an army I enjoy playing against, to be honest with you. Grey Knights, again, like, yes, they are very mobile, but where they suffer is in killing power. But they're like the one exception so far. Blood Angels, and again, these are all within that band, so we're kind of nitpicking at this point, and most Marine armies are actually better than their win percentages, in my opinion. And I've talked about this before. I think that Marines tend to underperform at tournaments, not because the player base is bad, but because you have a higher percentage of new players playing them. Necrons, not very mobile. So again, if you look at these top ones, Eldar, mobile, Votan, pretty mobile. Like they are deceptively mobile because they have to use transports. I don't think you could really play that army without them. Black Templars, again, they're kind of the weird exception, although a lot of those are just very mechanized with a lot of redemptors and stuff. Chaos Space Marines, fairly mobile. Orcs are actually another one of those armies that's deceptively mobile, and a lot of the winning lists are using a lot of like 5 mans of Storm Boys that they can cheese inside transports for the extra movement and stuff like that. And then the Squigs, you know, so they have a lot of like 10 plus inch movement units that have a lot of utility. Chaos Knights, and again, now we're starting to really nitpick. But that's what I mean. So World Eaters also really mobile. Like that first turn, Tau are pretty mobile. Death Guard are probably the one exception here, and GSC. Like Death Guard is not mobile, but Death Guard's rules are really weird to interact with, and like help make up for their lack of mobility. And Plagueburst Crawlers are just really good, right? And I've yet to play against a Death Guard player that isn't bringing at least one or two of them. GSC is the one really mobile army that I would say is the exception, and that's just because they've had at least one nerf, So it's one of those like, if you look though, like a lot of the tactical is mobile armies, Drukhari being the like major exception on the bottom end, and then I would argue that Black Templars are probably the exception on the top end as far as not being mobile. And Drukhari don't hold objectives. We just don't. And that's where we struggle. And I want to dig into this 44% before we get off here because I want to see something. Something about that does not seem right. Let's do it now. $40K stats, win rate. Oh, they have go first win rate now. Oh, what a shock. Deploy Servo Skulls has a super high go first win rate. Who would have imagined? I have to imagine that Scorch, yeah, that one also makes sense because you can start burning objectives quickly. Scorched Earth, Sites of Power. Man, not a lot of balance. Not a lot in a very. I've never looked at this. This might have to do its own like live stream video where we start talking about that. I think we will. So for those that know me, I'm all over the place, right? Like I'll see something and I'm just like, heck yeah. Real win percentage. Okay, that doesn't seem right. Leviathan GT. Okay. Data correct as of 20th November 2023. Okay, so 10 days ago, this data was accurate. But you're telling me Tau went from a 50% win rate to a 42% win rate? Games played, win rates, and average points. What the fuck? Sorry, I try not to say that on stream. But what is the date range for this data? Are these since the data slate? Is that? Okay, let's see. When was the last data slate? Let's take a look at when the last data slate was. This is why right here. Anytime GW presents me with statistics about their game, I am instantly like, I'm skeptical. Okay, how did we get these numbers? Because GW doesn't tell us how they get the numbers. If they were like, hey, this is what we're calculating, then I would be more inclined to believe what they're telling me. All right. And again, I'm sorry for being all sniffly. Yeah. Good morning, Daniel Bodecker. I was gonna make a post about being live, and man, like this morning has just been a nut house. And it's mostly just been me trying to hash out a bunch of issues with software and streaming. So it is what it is. We're getting there. So the balanced data slate for autumn 2023. When did this come out? What is it? Every quarter for the data slate, right? So September, October, November, December. Was it October? Is that when this one came out? Or was it September? Let's do this. June, July, August. Let's do September 1st for now. All right. Well, let's see if we can just find the article. Warhammer community, jump back. All right, so downloads 40K. September 7th. Perfect. So, really what we need is the weekend after September 7th because most tournaments aren't going to do it that close to their event. All right, so that puts us, boop. Let's go back here. So if we're looking at September 7th as our date, and even if I need to go back, I will. But see, GSC's got a real win of 42. Man, see, this is what I'm talking about. Like, where are they getting their data? This is absurd. Let's go back to the 20th for our end date. November 20th. Yeah, I see. This is why anytime Games Workshop tells me anything, I am skeptical of it, right? Because we have the Leviathan GT, and then we're sorting it by date. We're starting a week after the data slate, and it's going to end date of the 20th, which is when their data is accurate. 20th November. Man, I don't understand where their numbers are coming from. Now, Eldari at 56%. Okay, that's reasonably close. Let's check. World Eaters at 53 with Leagues of Vogues. Okay, so yeah, like where are these numbers coming from? Let's back it up to the actual data slate date. Games played, win rates, and average points by faction, blah, 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 blah. Right, okay. 56, so let's do this. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure where these numbers come from. I'm gonna have to ask my boss at GW, like, hey man, I'm trying to make a video, and I don't necessarily understand how we're getting these. Just something about this is, where the hell is this data coming from? Okay, well, let's just see. Because that was 9/7, right? September 7th. Because it wasn't July 9th. No, still not. All right, cool. And that's what I figured. Ah, geez. Where? So if we do that. Because these shouldn't be too different, right? Your real win percentage for most armies shouldn't be super different. But if we take these dates and we take it after the data slate, and then we end it when their data was supposedly accurate by, which, what day is the 20th? That's a Monday, so that would have been right after a big event, right? That makes sense then. Let's actually push it one more day then. See, this has got GSC at the bottom of the list, right? So I'm just baffled. I don't understand it. And maybe I'm missing something. And then supposedly Drukari are at 46%. So I don't understand how we could pick up these stats. Primary by turn, visualizations, events. Yeah, I don't personally understand how we could have these stats, and they are so far out of line with what GW is saying. Like, none of this makes sense to me. And it's not even that it's close and it's a little off. It's way different. So maybe my data slate. Yep, September 2023. And that's what I thought, right? Man, what if we bounce it one more week? I just don't think, right. I just don't think that this is making any sense. So I don't understand how we got the numbers at the Meta Watch, right? And I know we were talking about my issues with 10th, and we were about to dive into it before we digressed into here. And we just kind of were talking about the different armies that are struggling to hold objectives. And the reason we got to this point was because the fact that like fixed scoring needs to be a viable option. I will stand by that. Period. End of discussion. There needs to be something to make it a more viable option. Not that it needs to be. I don't even think it needs to be as good of an option as tactical. If GW wants us to play tactical, that's fine. But there are just certain armies that could benefit from being able to do fixed. You know, I think Custodes could benefit from being able to do fixed. Now, the problem becomes is that if you start making fixed better, then you're going to start increasing the likelihood of people making armies that just don't interact. And that was the issue with the end of ninth. That is how GW fixed armies at the end of ninth. Oh, Necrons are bad. We'll just give them Necron secondaries that are basically just an automatic 15 points for putting models on the table. So it's one of those like, I get the delicate balance that we need to maintain here, but maybe certain interactive secondaries maybe become more beneficial. Like engage on all fronts, promote players to like push players to jump into 4 table quarters. Instead of it being 5 points for 4 table quarters, make it 6 so that if they miss a turn, they can make those points up. And then they're still having to move into individual table quarters and interact in the game. Obviously, that's not a perfect solution because you'll still have players that are going to be like, well, here's my lone operative that deep strikes, and I'm just going to pin him in the corner, and then you just don't get to interact with him. But again, first of all, like, that's an inherent issue with the rules of the game. The fact that there's single model units with lone operative and deep strike that can interact in that way. But in addition to that, you can't, like, most armies aren't going to get 4 quarters in turn 1 if you took engage. And I don't even remember if engage is a fixed secondary right now, but that's not the point. Most armies cannot get turn 1 engage without building specifically for it. That being said, if you only get 3 table quarters and you took engage, you've just lost 2 to 3 points. Because I don't remember what engage is when you take 1 table quarter. Or the 3. Like, I don't remember if it's 2 and 5 or 3 and 5. But again, not really the point. Same with cleanse. Cleanse has to be no man's land objectives. So players have to get out of their deployment zone to do cleanse. So again, if you make cleanse 3 and 6, you're pushing players to have to take 2 objectives every turn in order to make their points. But then they're not like, oh, I missed a turn, I can't get a good score now, right? Like, I'm somehow just relegated to losing 2 points every time I just do 1. It's one of those, like, it's super weird. The other downside is that, like, it's a lot harder to shut off tactical objectives. Like, you can count cards and you can understand what it is your opponent's trying to do, but at the same time, you're, like, especially early in the game, there's only so much you can do, right? So it's one of those, if I take fixed, you can shut that off really easily. And that's where, if we just don't want people to play fixed, then just take it out of the game. If you do want people to play fixed, I think we fix it, right? Like, we rewrite some of these fixed secondaries and we see how that goes. So that was one of my big issues with 10th, right? And again, this isn't intended to be a rant. It's just why I've started looking at different games and going to different events and doing different things. Uh, and I feel like it's an explanation that I owe you as my subscribers and viewers, because now my content, you came here for the 40K content, and now it's starting to change a little bit. Like, we're starting to do other things. And that's not bad, but I feel like I should explain to you why we are at that point. List construction is another one of the things that I think really hurts 10th edition. I know a lot of players are just like, yeah, I love it. I can take whatever I want, blah, 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 blah. But there's serious repercussions to that. This game is 40 years old, right? And in 40 years, it has never been balanced around literally just cherry picking whatever units you wanted. It has always had some sort of balance around having to take X amount of HQs and X amount of troops, etc. Having to form detachments that could cost you command points or give you command points in 8th edition, right? So it's just one of those where we have these rules that have been in place pretty much since the game's been written, and 10th edition came out and it completely subverted one of the core mechanics that helped keep the game balanced. Craft worlds are real good. It's not that they're real good. It's that, and let me rephrase. Yes, they are. But part of the reason they're really good is a lot of the checks and balances that existed in the earlier editions to keep them from being the way that they are right now are gone. Ninth edition. You wanted to play the Incarn, you couldn't take Phoenix Lords, you couldn't take named characters, you couldn't take the Avatar. 10th edition, take it all. So it's one of those, like, I don't know what they expected when they removed those restrictions, but it's one of the more head scratching moments from 10th edition for me is, hey, wait a second. These rules existed to keep things in check. Like, yes, you could take 3 Smash Captains in 8th edition, but you still, well, 8th edition, it had its own issues with some of the detachments, like the Supreme Command getting 3 captains. But it's one of those, like, having to, oh, that's all right. If you don't have them, you don't have them. I might have some, Dan. I just haven't. I haven't dug through my bits yet. And really, Rich might have them. That might be where they're at. I just have a couple little jangly arms that I need to fix. Um, so being able to just cherry pick whatever you want to does drastically since the last meta watch. Okay, that's all right. Let's take a look at that. That's actually a good point. Meta watch 40K. Let's look at that. Actually, let's just go to community, articles. Okay, what? Not a fan of the new site. And I know I'm not alone in that one. So this is the newest meta watch. So let's see when the last meta watch is. Tampa, 19 October. Okay, so let's do that. 19 October, so after Tampa. Man, Sisters won Tampa. They're real good now. Busted. 19 October, so let's take a look at that. That would... well, Dan, I don't know if you're looking at your screen, but since the last Meta Watch, which was the 19th of October. Yep, and this is Goonhammer stats. All they do is track the BCP rankings. That's it. Like, all this does is collate data from BCP. So Sisters have a 55% win rate according to this. I'm curious to know what's changed. What if we open it up? Yeah, no, this is still, buddy, this is still not even close to accurate, like compared to what we're looking at here. So the last Meta Watch was on the 19th of October. Man, which was a Thursday. Let's change it to that Monday. And according to GW, Sisters have what, like a 50% win rate, right? But according to Goonhammer and probably BCP, because that's where they get their stuff, like, oh, for sure. And that's really where I'm at this point is like, it is the poopy duty. You are correct. I'm not a huge fan of the new GW site. It's real wonky. And it's just not very intuitive. It looks nice. Like, visually, it's aesthetically pleasing for the most part. But then when you try to navigate it, it's just not my favorite. So yeah, no, looking into it, man, like, it was a good thought. It doesn't look like that's how it is. Uh, because, bam, like, And then this is correct as of December 7th or October 17th. Yep. So, yeah, I don't know, man. I have no clue how they get their stats. I don't know where they get them, and that's why I never trust anything they tell me when it comes to stats, because they are very in the dark and closeted about how they compile their data. Um, but so yeah, that's basically where I've gotten to with 40K. Is like I'm gonna play, I'm gonna have fun. I'm still gonna be pretty good at it, but at the same time, man, like I just it's there's certain things about it that just aren't appealing to me anymore. You know, um, the weird list construction I'm not a fan of. Like I said, like being able to cherry pick whatever you want to, and then scratching your head going, "Gee, I can't figure out why the game isn't balanced." And there are things that have gone well for 10th. Let me say that though, so it's not all just doom and gloom. Yeah, and that's it. Is when you present stats and data, but then don't tell anybody where your source is, and then it doesn't line up with easily verifiable data, it just makes you wonder what it is they're tracking. Now, I've heard, and I don't know if that's true or not, but I've heard GW actually uses RTTs in their data as well, but I'd still be curious to know what their source is for that data. Because with Goonhammer, they're just tracking GTs and bigger, right? It's got to be a 2-day event to get put on here. And that's just because you get a little bit less skewed data that way. You know, and I talked about this before because there was something where they were tracking RTTs for Drukari, I think it was. And then Drukari ended up having like a 60% win rate for a weekend, but there was literally 2 players that played Drukari, and then I won an RTT with Drukari that weekend, and then the other player won like 1 game. So, or however the math ended up working out. But one player at an RTT, and nobody played them at a GT that whole weekend. So one player at an RTT that won 1 game, and then I won 3 games at an RTT. And it's one of those like, you could really skew data that way because like you get somebody like scarred or scared or however scary, or myself who are really good with an army that's kind of bad, and then we just go do a couple of RTTs, and not that I'm just going to win at an RTT. I'm not saying that, but I'm going to overperform compared to the average Drukari player. Just because I've put a lot of time in with that army. I've put a lot of time in with learning it and how to play it in 10th. I put a lot of time with it and learning it and playing it in 9th. So it's one of those like you get these people who get really good with a bad army, and then when you start tracking RTTs, the depth of talent isn't quite as big usually. So you're going to have very skewed results. All right. Let's find out actually. 40K stats with RTTs and GTs. Let's see if we can find that. Can we? I don't think we can. Yeah, I don't think we can add them to the Goonhammer stuff, which is fine. Faction versus faction. This is also an interesting one. I may need to just sit here probably next week and just do a big stats video where we kind of dig through all of these. Because I've found that does help some people to understand how this data actually works. Anybody can say anything, but when we look at it, so a good example is Eldari. Everybody's like, hey, Eldari, real good. And they are. Like, don't get me wrong. But if we look at Eldari, and then we filter it. So this is how you know the faction is good, right? Is they have a losing win percentage against one army, and that losing win percentage is not even a full percentage point. And then you can't count craft worlds because they are just playing themselves. So then they have an even win percentage against one army, and then they have a winning win percentage against everything else in the game. Interesting. All right. So that being said, yeah. See, man, I could talk all day about this stuff. So let's look at Drukari, because that's the other thing is like everybody's like, oh, Drukari's real bad. Well, probably. So they've got. Well, and Grey Knights makes sense. I could see that just because of the fact that Grey Knights just out mobile Drukari. Imperial Knights, I get, yeah, it's one of those I don't play against them enough to know. Votan is interesting. I'd have to assume it's because of the dark spam that tends to dominate most, or Darklance spam that tends to dominate most competitive lists. I've just kind of gone towards Haywire, and I feel like that's just done me a lot better. I have worse matchups into certain armies, but I have much better matchups into more armies. Orcs makes sense. So, okay. Chaos Knights, Dark Angels, Guard. Interesting. It's interesting. Like I said, it's one of those like I could talk for days about it. I'm gonna stop. I feel like the last half of this video I didn't really get anywhere. Sometimes it's like that, But we talked about what we wanted to. We talked about the old world, the morale checks, which is really what I wanted to make sure we talked about. Like that was very important to me to get in on that. And if you stuck around to the end, God bless you. Like I appreciate it. Some things I do want to say before we get off of here. If you see the logos at the bottom of the screen, again, Military Gaming Command. It is a nonprofit organization that works with veterans. So again, it's very special to me. I've seen the work that they do. I know the board. They're very good people. Starting in December, those were for me, Rich. Those weren't for Bodecker. He was looking for me. So we'll figure it out when I come by today. 1% of all, basically all revenue that I generate for Phoenix Gaming, 1% of it is going to get donated to them every month. So if you are a Patreon, 1% of your patron donations are going to them. If you buy on the web store, 1% of the web store is going to go to them. So it's literally just 1% of everything is going to them. I'm going to make those donations monthly. I will track them. I will release numbers. Again, they do a lot for building a good, healthy, friendly community, and I love just being able to help with that and just be able to do anything I can for them. So just wanted to make that announcement. Other than that, Rich, just to let you know, since you're on, I'm going to get lunch and then I'm going to get gas and then I'm going to head out. So I'll probably see you in about an hour, hour and a half at the most. I still have to pack also. Outside of that, you guys have a great day and we'll get with you next week. We will do a live video next week. Next week's live video will be a lot more focused. Um, I will make sure that it is a bit more focused than this one. Like I said, we did exactly what we needed to do the first half of the video. So next week we are going to dig into these stats. I'm going to see if we can figure this shit out.